Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Avijit Pathak is widely known, an eloquent teacher with enormous sense of social sensitivity. He has specialized himself on the study of Indian society with process of progression, change, development and modernity questions. We will be discussing some of these crucial questions on which Professor Avijit Pathak is engaged today. Professor Pathak, could you please briefly explain what attracted you towards the discipline of sociology and not towards science?
Yeah, you see that I think biography is very important, in deciding what we do. And I begin with a brief biographical note. I was a student of physics, and I was loving the world of physics, loving the world of mathematics, natural sciences, and doing undergraduation. But there was also a question that was haunting me, that I'm looking at a very important world, but the world of the objects, the world of the matter, inert objects. But the world that I see every day, a very living symbolic world, the world of culture, the world of meaning, symbols, human relationships, conflict, struggle, that strike my imagination, and I wanted to know about that. And then I thought of this university, JNU, and I came here for doing my master's MA, and that's where the engagement began. Classroom teaching, the way the professors taught, and from that entire ambience of the university, this culture of debate, discussion, all that we learn. And I started teaching since 1990 here, and that's the way this engagement began. And I enjoy its every moment, and it's a very living discipline with immense potential and the possibilities.
How do you like to describe the Indian social reality today? How it is different from the social realities of 1970s?
I completed my graduation in 78, 79, and 79 I joined JNU. So it was a time in Calcutta when, after the end of the Naxalite movement, and Siddharth Shankar Ray came as the Congress government came, and the legacy and that memory of the Naxalite movement was still alive in people's imagination. And as you know, you are from that part of the country, and growing up in Bengal at that time and growing up in Kolkata as a student, and your familiarity, the way you get exposed because of the peer and because of the culture. So there was a lot of culture of protest that you saw. I remember even during our school days, we grew up with a slogan which the leftist organization would utter, that my name, your name, everybody's name is Vietnam, long live Vietnam. And we would grow up with, at that time, 70s films like Pratidwandi, Satyajit Ray film, Janwar Onne and Mrinal Sen films. So all those things led to a lot of sensitization about about culture, about the way things were happening. So I think that there was certain kind of, although we are not students of a formal subject, but always certain kind of exposure to cinema, exposure to certain kind of a literature, and that very ambience of the city that possibly aroused interest in knowing the society, its symbols, its politics, its dynamics, its conflict.
As you told, you have grown up in a culture and an intellectual environment of 1970s and 80s. Now that we are in 2012, we are having different kind of intellectual environment, different kind of society. Do you like to explain, please, what kind of intellectual environment prevailed and societal condition prevailed in 1970s, 1980s, and also what are the changes in contemporary India today?
You see, that as part of the discipline, we look at change. In fact, the discipline itself, in the formal terms, the way Western universities it emerged as part of that process of change, the kind of change that French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, and that entire capitalism that led to, and all that early classical sociologists, they were trying to make sense of that change. Even when as students and researchers and teachers we are growing up, we could also see a massive transformation our society is taking place. And I think that the subject grows, acquires its sensibility, acquires its area of research, inquiry, from that process of change and a very living engagement with change. And you see, for example, the early phase of the nation making, And after the trauma of partition and the division of the country and the large-scale violence, and then this what social scientists love to call very grand Nehruvian vision of nation making, based on a centrality of a very secular state, certain kind of intelligentsia promoting scientific temper, Nehru's fascination with Soviet experimentation, some sort of Fabian socialism, the planning, the development, the big dams he would regard are the temples of modern India, establishing IITs, the modern institutes, the academies of culture. So there was certain, Nehru was trying to create certain notion of a modern infrastructure, of a modern industrial society. And Nehruvian state was planning to modernize and industrialize a traditional society like ours. And possibly because of Nehru's charisma and the power of the Congress, that Nehruvian consensus worked for some time, but the China war and Nehru's demise. And then we could see slowly that breakdown of that consensus. Yes, Indira Gandhi came, Bangladesh took place, there was a lot of euphoria centered on her, but then there was the dark memory of the emergency, and then the Operation Blue Star, and then we see after the 80s the growing fragmentation, the age of coalition politics, and the assertion of two things simultaneously. I would say three things simultaneously late 80s. On the one hand, the assertive identity politics, say for example the phenomenon like in Bihar and the UP, the way the political equations would change, the identity assertion of identity politics. And also the 90s was also a time when there was also a very assertive militant cultural nationalism that was going on, the Babri Masjid, things of that kind. And also late 80s, and when our present Prime Minister was the Finance Minister and Narasimha Rao was the Prime Minister, that entire policy of Indian state changing its self-perception and a very neoliberal economy. And worldwide also, the Berlin Wall collapse, the Soviet Union breakdown, and the fall of socialism, and the entry of transnational corporations, the global capitalism. So what we are seeing today, and the way as students and the teachers we grew up, that this interplay of these three forces, the identity politics, militant nationalism, the fragmentation, and the global capitalism, the liberalization. And that's why today when you and I look at the society, we see on the one hand, it's a very aspiring, assertive middle class, the changing landscape of the urban centers and the city. On the other, there is a growing marginalization, insecurity, certain kind of a delegitimization of the political class of the Indian state, and all sorts of civil society movements, what we call civil society movements, from Ramdev to Anna to all sorts of movements which are taking place. So all that, are creating, I believe, a very fertile ground for doing a meaningful social science and mainly sociology.
Now, do you feel the kind of theoretical perspective we used in 1970s and 80s and in 2012, are those efficient and sufficient enough to explain the contemporary Indian sociality?
I think it's a very good question, and I believe that with due respect to our people who built up the discipline, like Ghure, Yemen Srinivas, Professor Bete, Professor Singh, Professor J.P.S. Oberoi, and others who built up Indian sociology and created those institutions with tremendous reverence and respect. But it is also important that any discipline and any thought grows also out of innovations and changes and experimentations. And I believe that your question is very relevant. You see that, and it is important to rethink. At one level, we know that when India was modernizing and with that Nehruvian project, and then there would be a lot of studies. The village study became very important in the 50s, from Dubey to Singh and others. And in that village study, if we see that one kind of urge was essentially to understand that how a traditional village society, whether it is capable of transforming itself and changing itself and becoming an important part of the modernizing project. And that also led to that kind of study of the modernity and tradition, Professor Singh's modernization of Indian tradition and things of that kind that emerged. And then Andre Bete's work, Caste, Class and Power in the Tanjore village, So it is also like saying that how with the democratization, with the electoral politics, with the Panchayati Raj, how in the Tanjore village, how the power dynamics is altering, what kind of a dynamics is taking place between the caste, class and power. So these were the works, for example, to take these two illustrations, emerged out of certain need, out of certain time, certain context. But today you see that now the things that we are seeing all around us. Now India has changed and changed considerably. So we see now, as I told you, that on the one hand, the phenomenon of the new middle class, what we call the new middle class, the changing urban landscape, the media, the technology. Now these are the new areas where I see a lot of young researchers are taking interest in studying the changing urban landscape, the new middle class, the technology, the media. So the media studies are emerging, sociology of media and things of that kind. Imagine, for example, how interesting it would be if a sociologist works on call center phenomenon. And the very notion of the work, the alienation, call center, youth aspirations and things of that kind. That in the 50s, 60s we could not imagine because it was not there. Similarly, for example, the new movements, you are a great scholar of movements. Now you see that the kind of new movements that we are seeing, right from, earlier the Narmada Bacha Wandalan, and today the movement against in Tamil Nadu against the nuclear project, in Bengal against in the Shingur phenomenon, things of that kind, and the Ramdev and Anna, this kind of phenomenon. The very study of that, what is that sociology of this movement, dynamics of this movement, and also today, that the media and the media images of the movement, so television, movement, all those things is so important to study that. Similarly, the gender. Now, a lot of good sociological writings are coming on gender, on the question of feminism, on the question of patriarchy and caste, how patriarchy exists in Dalit families, for instance. So I think these are this is the way if our universities, our research institute, and our teaching program succeed in sensitizing new generation of learners. I think these are the new areas that would come, and possibly we would be able to go beyond that popular notion that sociology only talks about caste and village and family. And that changes are taking place, and that's a very welcome change.
Do you feel that till the concept of modernity, it's valid enough or efficient enough to explain the process of progression in Indian society, or we'll have to think in terms of multiple modernity or a process of modernity from below?
Yeah, it's a very important question. I believe that now at one level, when you see in terms of a civilization, now here is a very, very old civilization, a very old civilization that passed through so many trajectories and the turning points, and the flow of civilization is still alive. And in fact, even Nehru, in his discovery of India, would talk about that am I capable, despite my Western education and my urge to modernize this country, am I capable of understanding the flow of this civilization? So Nehru at times would say that I go to Banaras and go to Sarnath, and I feel that even Gautam Buddha is still alive today and teaching his first sermon. So he says that definitely there is certain vital force in that civilization that has kept it alive. And I think this vital force in civilization lies in epics, in mythologies, in folk tales, and it is very important to have our own language of progress, to have our own language of modernity. Ironically, despite repeated reminders by people like Gandhi or Tagore and others, we have not been, our intellectual class has not been able to engage, and I would blame also the left, that we have not been able to evolve a very distinctive language of Indian left. Is it possible, for instance, to talk about a very Indian project of a emancipation without talking about Kabir, without talking about that entire bhakti ecstasy, and the way it entered the subaltern classes, without talking about, Vivekananda's argument that the coming age would be the Shudra Raj. Now, I think these are the things which we have to work with the civilization, with some of the civilizational wisdom. And if we do work with that, and I think that's a challenge for the social scientist and the sociologist to engage with that civilizational dynamics and to evolve a very distinctive our language of progress, our language of modernity and development. And that, I believe, is very important. Otherwise, what is happening, the way a certain notion of a development we took, and that notion of development actually has not become very emancipatory for large sections of the people. Even those who believe that they are gaining the benefits of development at a deeper level, and if the sociologists talk about that, at a deeper level, even that is not benefiting. That is not benefiting them in terms of mental well-being, in terms of spiritual well-being. It was like saying that suppose I work in a multinational and I earn 2 lakh rupees per month as my salary, and I'm just 24. I have come out of Indian Institute of Management, and my first placement I get 2 lakh or 3 lakh per month, and I work for 16 hours for the company for a very hypothetical notion of the profit of the company and the efficiency, and my everything I have sold to the company, and there is utter void inside me. I don't have the time for my wife, for my child, for anybody, and I escape that void in terms of heavy boozing and conspicuous consumption on Sunday afternoon in Basant Kunj Mall. So it also kills me every day, mentally, spiritually. And I think these are some of the things. What is good life? What is good living? These are very civilizational questions. And any notion, if development is about well-being, not just the material well-being, but also the mental well-being, the moral well-being, ethical well-being, then there is no escape. We can avoid these questions. And the moment you begin to engage with these questions, it is like that you begin to negotiate with many of these ideals of the civilization and thinkers. So we have to work on that.
In view of the changes taking place in our society and also in the whole course of the discipline itself, do you like to redefine sociology today and its perspective? Should we have something like indigenization of sociology in India?
At one level, that ideas, the beauty of ideas is also that although ideas are great ideas, are definitely situated in certain geographical local, but the power of the ideas is that ideas also transcend the territorial boundaries. So it was like saying, for example, that you and I may not know the French language, but when you and I see a very good French film with the subtitle, it moves us. Although it was situated in the city of Paris, not in old Delhi, people of a different kind, but there is despite that territorial and the national location in a great film, there is something that transcends the territorial boundaries. I think it also happens with great ideas. So that's why, for example, Ivan Illich or the Paulo Freire, they may have written much about Latin American experience, but their experiences, some of the ideas that they're talking about, you and I could engage with that. Or the way Marx, from a different context, talking about the way he is redefining the world, we could learn from it. Similarly, that, for example, it is not that Gandhi would be seen merely as an Indian or Ambedkar would be seen merely as an Indian. Some of the questions they are raising, these questions might transcend the borders and the boundaries. So I believe that the search for knowledge is an attempt also, while remaining sensitive to the locality, to the context, but also the ability to embrace ideas. So I believe that if you ask me concretely, our sociology definitely ought to be very sensitive to our reality, to our specificity, to our mythologies, our folk tales, our civilizational issues. But our sociology should also be open enough to learn from other experiences and engage in a very creative conversation with those experiences. So I would imagine a student of sociology from an Indian university, who would be, suppose you are talking about method or the philosophy of science. He is well versed in what Gautama talked about in logic, in Nyaya, and he is also well versed in Karl Popper's conjectures and refutations. So it's like becoming a banyan tree, that you have deep roots and you are also expanding your branches into the sky. So that is where I think you as an educationist, and you are striving for that. That is why I think that the purpose of knowing, purpose of knowledge is that rootedness in time, in space, in our civilization, in our traditions of knowing, and with that rootedness would not become a constraint. It would become enabling, and it would give me the strength to expand my branches into the sky. So the fact that I would learn my epic, my folktale, my civilization, my thinker much more deeply, that itself is the reason I would learn Marx, I would learn Weber, I would learn Michel Foucault, I would learn Derrida much more meaningfully, and that is what I would imagine.
Thank you, Professor Pathak, for being with us and for giving a lucid description of the scope of sociology, your engagement with the discipline of sociology, and also simultaneously describing the way society has undergone a profound processes of change from 70s, 80s through 1990s. Also simultaneously you have discussed all about the changes in the sociological perspective in analyzing Indian society and also its relevance in contemporary India today. Thank you very much for being